We are here from Impact, and we are very glad to see so many people come out to hear about behavior-based personas, because it is something that we are evangelizing heavily for, something that we believe in quite a bit, and the reason for us creating a methodology to help teams make them for themselves. So if you would like to try the methodology, you can stick around till the end, because we're going to be giving away a code so you can download the light version for yourselves. I am a content strategist, so I do spend most of my time thinking about what types of content people need when they want to have it, and the best way to deliver it to them. Priyama, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you do so many things.
So I do a little bit of experience research at MadPow, and I also do experience strategy, which is basically looking at multiple touch points that a company might have and make them all work well together. And I work a lot in very fuzzy front-end innovation products, completely disruptive solutions that people might be offering their customers.
So we both work for MadPow. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with it, but we have two offices, one in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and one in Boston. We have about 70 people split between those two offices. And we are what we call a human-centered design firm. We believe that everything should start with the people that we are designing for. And our two primary practice areas are healthcare and finance, although we do some other areas as well. Our three main service areas are experience innovation, which starts with research. We do service design projects and a lot around teaching organizations to bring design thinking in. This is really big for some older companies who just can't wrap their brain around thinking about people versus their products. We also have, I think I could call them a world-renowned behavior change team. They seem to be spending most of their time traveling the globe, speaking at conferences when they're not solving problems for us. And we also do end-to-end digital solutions, so starting from concepting all the way to development. So as I said, we do work quite a bit with financial services. We like to say that we've worked with all of the big names. We currently have a master service agreement with Vanguard, doing a lot of digital products for them. And within health services, even more, because that's kind of how we got started, working with a lot of patients and providers and healthcare systems. And when we get bored with that, we get to work for ESPN and Netflix. So how many people here, well, I'm going to assume most of you, many of you use personas in your everyday work, so I'm sorry, you're going to have to sit through these slides because it took a long time to write them. So I'll start with, what is a persona? Most of us, I don't know, when I first heard the term, I had a very negative feeling about it because it seemed to be sort of a fake thing that you would put on so people couldn't see the real you. But for us, we really think about personas as being a representation of the people that are behind everything we do. We are designing apps for them. We are creating educational materials for them. They're the people that are going to use the products and visit the hospitals, open the bank accounts. And personas are incredibly useful for design teams because they help them understand these people at the end of the products and really help them empathize with them and the struggles that they face. So since you're familiar with personas, you probably know they were first mentioned in Alan Cooper's book, The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. And he tells an anecdote about writing a software program for project managers. And as he was doing it, he found it much easier to write when he thought about his friend Kathy, a project manager, and he would ask himself, well, what does she have trouble doing? What are the problems that she calls me up and complains about? And he just kind of worked step by step through this at every point asking himself, would she have a problem with this? How can I solve that for her? When could I make it easier? So since then, personas are widely accepted. They're part of every designer's toolkit, and if you search personas in Google, you will get so many results. They're really pretty though. And you would think because they're so useful that they would be winners all the time, but Priyama and I have seen throughout many projects that they often fail. And we have asked ourselves why, and we see things over and over and over, common things. One big thing is, as Priyama mentioned, when you're talking about personas and you're talking about people, that's something people think that they can sort of grasp intuitively, and it's almost a fuzzy science to develop these personas. It's more about my opinion than actual data or fact. And so you often get teams that are sitting in a room. They are not very diverse in terms of the stakeholders. They're one product team. They don't include anyone above them. They don't include anyone below them. They don't have any customer service reps. They don't have anyone from development. And another reason is they're sitting there in that room not because they want to and not because they think personas are useful, but because they've been told that you will do a persona project and you will have personas because we have a budget for it and we want you to do them. Also, everyone else is doing them. And then again, going back to these assumptions that they make about their audiences that have no relation to research. So when you put all these things together, you end up many times with personas that fail. And they fail for a number of reasons. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but Priyama is going to talk about what we think are the top 4.
All right, thank you. Let me just reconnect the power. What? No. All right, so as Dana said, there's different reasons why personas fail, and we as practitioners face them again and again when working with clients, talking about their restrictions within their organizations, why they couldn't really socialize the personas that we were building for them, what were the roadblocks that they were facing. And then our assumptions were validated by Nielsen Norman because they have the exact same set of drawbacks that we were discussing. So let's talk about them in a little bit more detail. So personas are time and resource intensive. So again, we looked at Nielsen Norman to find out exactly how long does it take to build personas at different organizations. And you will see that there's a difference between personas based on non-empirical data and empirical data. Also differs on the size of the company. So the smaller bar there is the smaller companies, and the larger bar is larger companies. In case you cannot read it, the blue portion of that bar is the part where people conduct research. And the gray portion is where they analyze data, and the pink portion is where they actually create the persona assets. So this is a significant amount of time that is being spent, and a lot of staff hours that are spent on personas. So we sought out ways in which we can cut down this time spent, and we'll talk about which part of this we cut down later. Some other drawbacks are that personas are often based on demographics. Very often companies have marketing personas that they are widely socializing. And they sort of work with designers, they give those to designers, they're like, this is what we are, they want to be aligned on those marketing personas. And even if designers go out and make regular, what we know as design practitioners as personas, they want those personas to be mapped back to the marketing personas. And that sort of creates a challenge because, as I mentioned, they're often based on demographics. But what is the drawback of that? They don't really tell us what users need. They don't tell us how people will react in a variety of products and to a variety of products and services. And they don't tell us what people might, why people might do what they actually do. So think about this sentence right here, this phrase: a blonde woman in her 40s, married with children. So this is an example of how people take demographics to think of customer segments, but what comes to mind when you think of a sentence? You might have a picture in your head, but were you imagining something like this, or were you imagining something like this, or something like this? Were you thinking about a really educated woman? How old were her children? Is she in? Does she sit in the White House? What were you really thinking about your user when you thought of that sentence? So when these personas are based on demographics, they may promote stereotype because people then make assumptions on how people will behave based off of their education, their income, their race, their gender, etc. So what are some examples of what are stereotypes really? They're just ways of boxing people into these categories of how, and then just imagining that if someone belongs to a certain category, they behave in a certain way, which is really not true. Think about some common stereotypes that are out there around gaming, that most men are gamers, but what about the women that dominate the gaming industry? Or high-end or luxury goods only being bought by high net worth individuals while completely disregarding the experience of lower and middle income earners. And baby boomers that don't like using technology, this is something that I hear all the time and which is completely untrue. Versus baby boomers who are becoming increasingly tech savvy and want to be able to achieve things by themselves when interacting with a company. Or millennials that like to do everything digitally. I know plenty of millennials, including myself, who prefer paper over the digital medium. So that really brings us to behavior-based personas, and Dana's going to tell us a little bit about what that is.
So yeah, behavior-based personas clearly are personas that are based on people's behaviors rather than their demographic attributes. And at MadPo, we really think that they are more actionable. You can take what you know about someone's behavior and design for that far more easily than just knowing about their demographics. So that is really why we started thinking about, how could we make it easier for people to do behavior-based personas. And I want to say that it's not that demographics can never be useful. It's just, for us, we think that behavior is the place to start. You can often think about behaviors, build a behavior-based persona, and then go back to your research, your data. And if you have very clear research that says a particular age group is likely to do X, well, then you use that as an overlay to your behavior-based personas. And behavior-based personas are really about understanding, the thinking, the feeling, the saying, and the doing. So it's a way to help you predict how people are going to behave in certain situations. So we have, in our methodology, we use sets of behavior attributes, and they are displayed on this scale with an extreme at either end. So in this example from the finance kit, we have decision making. Oh wait, sorry, this is health. There's decision making, and you have a person who is an active decision maker, who is someone who does a lot of reading, is asking Dr. Google, might talk to friends and family before they make a decision, and they want all the information about all the options before they make a choice. On the other end, you have the passive person who is really looking for the healthcare provider or a trusted expert of some sort to tell them what to do. Making the decision is too much of a burden for them. And for designing, even though in real life it's not likely that we will all fall on one extreme or another, for designing, it's more helpful to focus on those extremes, because if everyone's down the middle, how are you going to design anything that's different? So in finance, same thing here. We have an attribute that's around how people deal with their financial matters. Are they micromanagers who want to know exactly what's going on with everything, or do they tend to, keep their hands off? I bought my insurance policy 10 years ago and I'm not going to review it, I'm fine with it. So we have 3 versions of our impact kit. One is for health, one is for finance, and we have a light kit, which is industry agnostic. So you can see that there are certain attributes that cross over, like decision making and people's attitudes toward complexity. And then there are some that are specific to each field. So coming up with these attributes, we spent hours and hours of research, either interviewing people or going through lit reviews. We did qualitative and quantitative research. We had our behavior change team vet everything, make sure that it was accurate to their understanding, since they're well versed in this. And we are going to have our slides posted afterwards, so if you're interested in the sources and the research that we use to come up with this, they will all be listed. So if we kind of go back and think about Priyama, and if I were tasked with coming up with designing a medication adherence app for her, and I had her demographic profile, which tells me a lot about her, how old she is and what her marital and family status is, her education and her occupation, her geographic location. And then we look at what a behavior-based persona tells us about her, which is that she gets overwhelmed really easily if things are complex, that she likes to be told what to do. She doesn't look around for the best options, and she just kind of goes for what's easiest, and she doesn't always follow a treatment plan. Now for me, I would look at those last 3 attributes, and I might think that I should just give her the answer, but if I'm really designing to make her life better, what I'm going to want to do is find some way to help teach her about her best options, to give her more information in a way that's not too complex, not too overwhelming, but will actually nudge her a little bit towards making better, healthier choices for herself. And now I'm going to hand the mic over to Priyama to talk more about impact.
All right, so what is this impact thing that we've been talking about? So while we are here talking about agile behavior-based personas, we really worked on a methodology that people can use and picked up pieces of what is most important to include while creating a persona. And it's a little different than personas as you traditionally know it. It takes elements from archetypes, it takes elements from design thinking. It just takes all of that in and puts it into a kit that teams can use. So today I'll introduce what the kit is. They're laid out in front of you. You can check them out afterwards. So Impact is an Agile persona construction toolkit. So it's a generative toolkit that can help you create behavior-based personas. So in a single session, in a day-long session, teams can create 1 to 5 personas. And it's not meant for building enterprise-wide personas, so you don't make one persona and you just use those again and again. It's intended to build personas every time the team is working on a new project, on a new feature, on a new product, or a new solution. So the personas can be refreshed. The behavior attributes within that, which we'll talk about more about in a minute, can be refreshed. The reasons why you're building that personas and the business drivers can be created and thought about fresh. So as Dana was talking about the behavior attributes on a scale and the different attributes that she listed out, we actually have 3 kits. We have the health kit, we have finance kit, and we have the industry agnostic light kit. So the health one is specifically for patients or health seekers, as we are starting to call them, because they might not necessarily be someone who is unwell. It could be just someone trying to get better, just engage more with their health. And the finance kit is made specific for people approaching their personal finance. And this is what the kit looks like when it's laid out It's colorful. We wanted something which has a slightly more playful and interesting feel to it rather than a digital medium. So it's intended to be such that people stand around it, talk about it, use it for discussion, and really collaborate in the same room face to face. And we'll talk about the different pieces that are available little by little. The one you see over there is the finance kit. And as I mentioned, it's supposed to engage people in conversation. So each of the decisions that the team is making on the persona is based after these debates and discussions and looking through the content that is available. The attributes that we have and what Dana talked about earlier have been taken from our research of what we felt was the most polarizing factors in how people think about their health or their finance, how they make decisions, and how they take actions. So that, again, you'll see over there that you have people reading through the content on it before reaching the decisions. And this is a facilitated activity, so you require one person to be the person who is leading the group through the session, and they need to know the kit intimately. They're the only one who needs to know the kit intimately to lead a session. And it is also actionable because at the end of the process, after you've talked through the different pieces and parts and made decisions, there are design tips that we've included at the end. So these are not prescriptive, but they're high-level strategy-based design tips. Each one of them maps back to a particular behavior attribute and where a person is on the spectrum that Dana talked about. So there are a variety of design tips in the kit. They talk about things as specific as actual UX or maybe even the content, the kind of content that should be in there. Might even talk about staff training or staff structure. And once you know who built the kit, which I'll talk about later, you'll know why there's a wide variety of design tips in there. So the impact methodology, really, the kit is sort of the vehicle for the methodology, and the methodology is what's super important here. It is behavior-based, so we are asking people to focus on those attributes that have an impact of how people approach their health or finance decision-making. Or if you're working on the industry agnostic kit, you can use that for any field at all, for employees, for students, for anyone. And it's relevant because we ask people to gather research before running a session, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. And it's agile, as I mentioned. You make a new persona every time the need comes up, rather than using the same set of personas every time. And it's collaborative. We encourage teams to have diverse members there, so whether they're from the product teams, design teams, content teams, higher level stakeholders. Everyone should be in the room making those discussions, so it's easier for buy-in, and you've reached those decisions together, so there's less friction when it comes for socializing. And it's action-oriented because the full kits, they come with design tips which are based on the behavior attributes. The light kit, however, the one that we'll give you access to today, don't have the design tips that we've come up with, but you have instructions in there to make your own design tips if you decide to use this kit. So a little bit about how we designed the methodology and how this came about. In total, it was about 2 years that this took us. So we did this between project work and all the other things that we had to do as part of our regular jobs. It was a very iterative process, but the beginning of this was we began to realize, with all the research that we've done, with all the research that MatPower has done, we began to realize that we are sort of replicating the same work a little bit over and over again, and we as a company, we know what are those attributes in a person that has an impact on how people behave when it comes to the health of their finance. And we decided to put that together, consolidate it, and present it in a format that other people can use. So others that might not have access to this kind of research can use the work that we have done, use a lot of the thinking that we have done as a starting point for their own projects. So as I mentioned, we did work in we've done a bunch of work in finance and health, and Dana talked about the list of companies there. But so in health, it was banking, investment, fintech, and other financial services clients. And in health, it was pharma, healthcare, wellness, health insurance, and health tech clients that we've worked with. And this is for the past, I think this is clients between 2007 and 2017, because that's when we wrote the actual content for the kit, and we used all of that understanding. So the team that built it wasn't involved in all of that research, but we did have access to the research that was done before. So we did a variety of research methods and used a variety of research methods to inform the actual behavior attributes. And the details came from what people said, how interviewers interpreted the personality of the people interviews that they were talking to, and bringing all that understanding together. And of course, a great team of people. So as I mentioned earlier, there was a diverse team involved in building this. So we had Dana, a content strategist, we had a researcher, we had a organizational designer. Magadara is actually an organizational designer. And 2 experienced strategists that worked on the project. So we each brought our unique perspective into it, and each one of us thought of design and solution building from our individual perspectives. While I might think of more service design-based solutions, Dana would think of more content-based solutions, while Magadara would think of organizational shifts and training, etc., that kind of solution, so that we brought all that cohesive thinking together in one kit. And as I said, this was an iterative process. So the early stages of this looked a little bit like that. We were still playing around with the framework of what should happen first, what should happen next, etc. So we made cards on simple pieces of paper, illustrated it, and tried it out with our colleagues, presented it to them, asked them the usefulness of this, and really solidified on the framework first itself. And then we wrote content, a lot of content, too much content. It ended up being so much that it wouldn't fit on a plain card. And we then had to go back and cut down some of the information that we had in there because it was just too much to digest. And then we had brainstorming sessions where we would think about different behavior attributes, because we had lists of them. We had all of that from the research. But we wanted to map them to each other. We wanted to see where they sort of overlap. Are there constellations of behavior attributes that are important to have in this kit? And that's what you see on the right over there. And then we started taking it out into the world. We took it to a few conferences. On the top right, that's a very early iteration. It's just on a large piece of paper instead of a fancy board like you have. And we had people writing stuff for some of the pieces. Then we realized that was too much of a load. We brought it back, we built it more, and really started talking to people, understanding their value, what they were seeing, how they saw that fitting into their organization, and iterated on the process as well as on the content. And as Dana talked about earlier, the design tips themselves are based on psychological theories. You can see a list of them up here. There are sources at the end if anyone's interested. But we took these, we thought both about behavior change, and we also thought about meeting people where they are without the requirement of the behavior change. And we wrote these design tips accordingly. So we will introduce you really quickly to the MPACT framework. And the purpose of this is firstly to just tell you what the framework is, and secondly, if you do decide to use the light kit that we'll give you access to, this is electronic, it's completely free. The next few slides will help you use that if you decide to use it.
So if you come up afterwards and look at the kits that are laid out here, as Priyama said, this was an iterative process. And what we have here are the version 1.0, which the first time, oh, that's, okay, so you should definitely compare the two, because we used this one with a client, and it, you know, I still have a job, so it wasn't that bad, but we got a lot of great feedback from that. One of our company's founders was there for that session, and she had a lot of great advice, which we followed, and to make it much better. So really, as Priyama said, this is a facilitated activity. So we have a rather thick facilitator's guide. One of the key differences between 1.0 and 2.0 is that for 1.0, we really thought everyone would read every page of this facilitator's guide and digest it and use it, and that did not turn out to be the case. So what we came up with was an idea of really making everything as self-explanatory as we could. So when you come and look at the game board, everything is laid out. Step 1, step 2, step 3. There are arrows to walk you through, and many of the cards now have instructions right on their face rather than someone having to read this beautifully written, I must say, facilitator's guide. But so it's a very simple, straightforward process, and it almost seems a little bit like duh. But you start out, you have your teams together, and you really start by setting your business objectives. So this is the goal of the entire project. So if I go back to my example, I want to create a medication adherence app that will have a 50% uptake and a 75% success rate. So that is an example of a business objective that we would like because it is not only detailed and specific, but it is also measurable. This often is something that causes a lot of heated discussion when you bring diverse stakeholders together, because if you bring people in from different departments, of course, they want their goal to benefit their department. And there's nothing wrong with that, and we actually like to have that discussion happen because at the end of it, you come to a consensus and you have set your goal and you know what everyone is working towards. So that's your business objective. We also allow, the light kit is slightly different than the other kits, but we always let people create their own business objective since it's likely to be the most sort of personal and specific thing. In 1.0, we called this the user objective, which we got some feedback that user was a term about recovery and that we should steer clear of that and just call it a persona objective. So it is now the persona objective. And this, of course, is the goal of the person that you're designing for. So in this case, I want uptake for my medication adherence app, but Priyama just wants her joints to stop hurting. That's her objective. We have some examples of persona objectives in the full kits. So the next step in the process is to then identify what we call the trigger event, which is what's prompting the persona to take action. And in the medication adherence example, it might be I'm experiencing new symptoms. So now it really becomes, or Priyama is experiencing new symptoms, and it becomes critical to her to figure out how to get them to stop, and maybe it's to actually take her medicine. Again, there are, actually this is the set that has the most examples, but with all of these, the objectives and the trigger event, we do have instructions for creating your own. So if it doesn't fit, people can make their own. I'm not going through the slides. Are you for me? Thank you. Okay, good. So the next step, and what's really kind of the main focus here, are these behavior constellations. And the constellation is just a fancy word for groupings, and they're grouped in behavior attributes that are associated closely with each other. So in guidance, you have self-direction, impressionability, and trust. So, it's around, am I a person who does things on my own, or do I need a lot of hand-holding? Impressionability, of course, like, am I likely to be influenced by those around me, or do I kind of make a decision and stick to it? And then there's trust, which is especially important in financial services and in health, because do you believe that the people that you're working with have your best interests in mind, or do you think they're kind of just out to get you and make money? But if you look on the game board, the next step of the process is to choose one of these constellations or groupings. And in the case of the medication adherence app, we might start with, I'm going to say, management, because we are asking Priyama to manage her health. And if she is a person who has a hands-off attitude, she's probably not going to, on a day-to-day basis, be very involved in going through the steps that she has to take. So if we start with management and we start with approach and we choose hands-off, we will likely choose the attribute that corresponds with it. They tend to sort of go in pairs. So if she's a hands-off person, she's likely also to be a person who stays at the surface level. So we would find our attribute cards here. You pull them out of the deck and you lay them down on the board and put your others aside. So you kind of, if anyone's ever played Dungeons and Dragons, what you're really doing here is building your character attributes. And we tell people they can do one of the groupings or they can do all of the groupings. It's helpful to do one, it's helpful to do all. It's really about how much time and energy you want to put into it. But the cards, as I said, we have developed them now to be much more self-explanatory. Each one of the constellations has an overview card that explains it, explains the specific attributes that lie within it. And each of the attribute cards also has a pretty long explanation, not only of the attribute, but how that attribute affects how people act and behave. And in the full kits, we also have design tips listed on the cards, which map to these tiny design tip cards. So in the process, what you do is you start picking your behavior attributes and creating your deck of them that you can lay out. You map them to your design tips, and then if you are downloading the light kit, what you would do is, after reading your attribute cards, you can decide for yourself, well, what do I think would be the answer to designing for a person who has these behaviors? So you kind of have to come up with those on your own in the light kit. But for the full kits, we do have quite a few. And once you have worked your way through as many constellations as you want and gotten your design tips, we usually ask people to take them and spread them out on a separate surface, read them through as a group, and then affinity map them. And people often find that design tips from across different attributes fall into distinct categories. It might be around communication, it might be around content delivery. So once you affinity map them, you are ready to move on to the final step, which is to fill out your persona sheet. And this sheet really is kind of your final artifact where you list your attributes, your objectives, your affinities for the design tips. You give your persona a name, which we, the delegator, not Bob. And if people so choose, they can go on and do empathy mapping for their persona. But it's a very straightforward process. It's 5 steps, 6 steps, 7 steps, and you walk your way through, fill it out, and then you've got a persona. And we find that people can often do that in an hour and a half. So much faster than what we have found in not using a structure like this.
Really, so earlier when I was talking about the time taken to create personas, we are not eliminating the research portion of it. We are not looking to eliminate that. The assumption here is still that people come to a session like this with research. But what we are looking to shave time on is the analyzing the data and crafting the actual persona asset. So that's where we're trying to cut down on some of the time. So when we say that we do this in a single day long session, that excludes research. So how do you really do research to inform an impact session? So we've used both empirical and non-empirical research for impact sessions. So if companies have a whole lot of first-hand interviews, etc., surveys, anything that we can use, we'll use that. We've also run sessions to teach people how to use impact, but in that we've used existing reports on how people approach their health or finance. And it is a little bit of making the jump from what exists in that report to how it informs the behavior attribute, but it can be done. It can be reasonably done, and we've done that in the past. And of course, we say to conduct research before the session. So during the session, it's just a matter of playing back that research, discussing it, seeing how that fits in with the different personas, and then creating design tips for them. We also recommend using the actual attributes on the board to guide the research. So again, like as we mentioned, we've seen that these are the main behavior attributes that have a huge impact on how people approach health or finance. And if you ask questions around them, so for example, if you're trying to get at if someone is very patient or impatient when it comes to management or their health, you can just outright ask them, but a better way of doing that is saying, how long do you wait for results when you start taking medication? So something else that hits at that attribute, that's a good way of structuring research around that. We also ask participants to, whoever will be included in the session will be participating in an impact session. We ask them to review the research beforehand, or we give them the research. Sometimes they don't look at it, so it's always better to play it back right before the session as well. And include as many verbatim quotes as possible if people are doing first-hand research, because that helps to get a sense of the personality. Very often when we are just looking at the high-level findings of a research, we talk about their challenges, their barriers, their goals, etc., but it doesn't give us a sense of who they are as people. So having verbatim quotes helps to do that. Invite someone from the research team, whoever has conducted the research, if it's not you. We ask them to invite them to observe or even participate in the session to fill in any gaps in the persona creation and in the understanding of the persona. And of course, to bring the research to the actual impact session, so that's available to refer back to if needed. I think the last couple of slides, and then we'll open it up for questions. So just to summarize everything we've talked about, personas help to keep the focus on customers. They help to serve as a reference point when evaluating solutions that teams are working on. And they are a powerful tool for designing optimal experiences for audiences, because it helps to envision how they will react in a variety of situations. And research is really key to identifying the behavior attributes in an impact session. It can be obviously done off of assumptions, but that is not the best way to do it. Even if there is no research available, we sometimes say that have a customer-facing person available in the room to ask questions to, because they have the best insights into what how customers behave. The real value of the methodology and having this kit on a table in front of you, having a group collaborate around it, is really the discussions that happen in a session. Whether it's an organization which is very advanced in their customer-centered thinking, or whether it's an organization that is just being introduced to customer-centered thinking, it really works in both situations, helping people get either introduced to the idea that people are different, they behave differently, they are in different life situations, and their life situation actually affects how they engage with the product or service. And secondly, for organizations that are already very savvy in customer-centered thinking, it helps to create agile personas that you can create for individual projects, which is really that last point there, that you can create personas for projects as and when you need it, so that if there's anything in an existing persona that is not relevant anymore, it can be removed. You can think about things that are relevant for that particular project that you're working on. So we really set out to remove some of those flaws in personas that we talked about earlier. The process does shave down a lot of the time taken and the man hours taken, the staff hours taken to build a persona. We base it on research. We encourage people to base the attributes on research rather than making assumptions on the demographics of their customer audiences. We try to remove stereotypes by really talking about behavior attributes of individuals rather than associating behavior attributes with any stereotype or even demographic. We try to make it more fun, try to make it more collaborative. So hopefully it is no longer treated as a to-do item. And it is agile, so it's not necessary that one persona needs to be used again and again. And if the teams themselves are bought into the process, if they're involved in the persona building process by using the impact methodology, they will know how to apply them, get a deeper understanding of a customer that they're designing for. And if you also have higher level stakeholders involved, you get that buy-in from leadership. Very often we work with clients who talk about, just earlier today I heard about, our personas all come from the marketing team, and when we build design personas, they want us to map them back to that, but we want to be involved in the persona creation. So that's a great way to get many people involved in that process and get them introduced to design personas. Or we hear things such as development teams don't want to build personas, they don't want to use our personas because they don't see the value in it. But if they're instead brought into the process of building, then it's possible to get more buy-in from there. And any questions before we give you the code to use the kit for yourself?
Hello. So on the attribute you showed of like the decision-making role, active versus passive, is that a spectrum that you place people on, or binary, either active or passive for any given attribute?
I'll just repeat the question before Dana answers it, is that when we show people on a spectrum, we show the behavior attribute with two ends of a spectrum. The question is do we look at it as binary, or can they fall between somewhere in the middle of that spectrum?
I mean, in reality, we know that most people aren't binary, but for the sake of persona building, you just get much more effective personas when you do design for those extremes.
So the way the kit is structured is you pick one for
Yeah.
each attribute.
In the sheet itself, you do have the option of placing them elsewhere, so you don't have to place it at the end if you want. But as Dana said, the design tips itself are around one or the other.
I'd like to know, can you explain a little bit about the difference between a user persona, behavioral persona, and use case, where somebody is going through a process that you're addressing with the product?
The question is, what is the difference between a behavior-based personas and a use case where someone is going through the process of engaging with a product? As I mentioned earlier, we've taken different elements and we've sort of brought them in. So I think a use case is sort of one element that we've brought in. So when we're talking about the persona objective, it is that one particular thing that they're trying to achieve, but we don't actually have them go through different steps of the journey. Sorry, you look like you have something to say.
No, I'm just thinking, the example that I have in my head is sort of like for banking. Somebody walks into the Bank of America with the interest of opening a checking account. That's something very specific, probably has less to do with their demographics than not. But it's a series of steps and a series of confusions and a series of preparation that they may or may not have done beforehand, all those kinds of things.
Yes, a behavior-based persona can help you envision how that persona will react in that series of steps, which is really the journey. So for example, if we take someone who is the two ends of a spectrum are easily influenced or rarely influenced. So just taking that one attribute to illustrate an example. If you have someone who's easily influenced, it could be that they walk into the bank, that the customer service rep speaks to them, tells them about something great. And they're like, this is it, you're the right person, you're just awesome, you told me what's right for me, sign up immediately. While someone who's rarely influenced will imbibe that information and be like, I don't really know whether you're you're taking me for a ride, or this is like, true, maybe I should go do more research for myself, and then there are more steps added. So like in any persona, we use the persona itself to guide the journey, to guide the steps of the journey. And I realized I forgot to repeat his question, and some of you might not have heard his question. It's really what happens when there's a variety of steps, and how does the persona fit into that. So envisioning different kinds of behaviors helps you envision the actual journey that the persona might go through, because even though the steps from the bank's point of view, the example is a person walking into a bank and wanting to open an account. Even though the steps might be the same from the bank's point of view, for the individual user, based on their behavior attributes, they could be doing things that are absolutely different from someone else. They could be researching online, they could be going and looking at other banks, while someone else might just decide there and then, this is the account, I don't want to do the work to go look at other banks. I don't want to see if this is the best option. I'm just going to open an account right here. Does that help?
So typically you have more than one persona when you're designing. Do you, in your kit here, do you say, okay, here's all the attributes all at once, or do you pick just trying to figure out how you do it for the multiples going through it?
I'll repeat the question. The question is, usually you have more than one persona when you're designing. So what happens when we are using the kit? How do we design multiple personas when we're using the kit?
So it's really straightforward. We just say, like, work through the 7 steps, and at the end of that, go back and start over. So when we are talking about that case of the person easily influenced, rarely influenced, if you know you want to represent both types of behaviors for your project, you will complete one persona, and then go back and go through those steps for the opposite end of the spectrum. And because there are 16 behavior attributes, in that, you can complete one grouping and move from grouping to grouping if you want to make sure that you address every single one of those behavior attributes for your persona.
So you almost have to know everything ahead of time rather than design. I mean, just
No, because yeah, so as you're building the one persona, you're thinking to yourself, well, we really want to represent someone who behaves in a slightly different way, but you're not going to cram you can't build one persona for someone who's easily influenced and rarely influenced. Although, you can say this person is rarely influenced except when under stress, and when they're under stress. So if your trigger event is a highly stressful trigger event, you might view the persona through that filter. But ideally, you don't have to know everything, but you do have to make decisions about everything, if that makes sense.
Excuse me. So Alan Cooper said you should go out and do extensive ethnographic research. Then he also said, it's absolutely critical to have all kinds of specific details on the persona to help people communicate and kind of understand them. But you've kind of thrown out all the specific details of the person. Can you say more about whether it's still easy to communicate and talk about the personas without the details?
So the question is that Alan Cooper talked about doing a lot of ethnographic research, and he put a lot of very granular details into the personas, and we're kind of saying, like, no, don't do that, just stick to the behavior. But I think it's more, if you think about building a house, we're saying, like, the foundation of that house needs to be behavior-based, but the decorative elements that, you can layer on some demographics. We work with clients who have spent a lot of money on proprietary research about their customers, and they do know specifically that people who live in this zip code do a certain thing. And we're never going to argue with that, but we're going to say, if you want to build personas for your teams, start with the behavior, then put on your demographics, and then hand them out, because your teams will accept them more.
Yeah, just to add to it, there's some parts which we didn't speak about in detail. So, for example, if you're working on selecting a persona objective, we have how might I statements in there, which basically talk about if a persona is trying to make a healthcare decision, that's what this card is. There's a bunch of things at the back that we found from research that people are likely to do when making a healthcare decision. So there are things like compare treatment options, get advice or a second opinion, determine whether or not to have a procedure, find out how much this will cost me. So some of those other elements haven't really been thrown out. We've taken them from our research, we've presented it back in a way that we know these are the things that people will do, but teams are also welcome to add to it. The other level of detail we add is persona insights and persona goals. So we've attached this to trigger events, so things that happen in a persona's life that impact how they are feeling and thinking. So the persona insights are feeling, thinking, saying, and doing. And the persona goals are things like, this one is specifically is benefits enrollment, so that's the trigger event here. And the goals are things like pick the best insurance for my family and me, and understand the nuances of health insurance. And all of this information, there is place for either in the persona sheet or in the empathy map that people work on later. So that this is a critical step after the persona is built, where other discussions that have been had during the session should be transferred over. And if it's not something that exists within the kit, they can still be brainstormed on by the group. Does that help?
Obviously, a lot of hard work and research went into building these kits for health and finance. I'm wondering if you have any tips or recommendations for creating one for, maybe a specific persona type or set that, or industry that we might be working in.
We actually have, right now we have an engagement model, so which is something we do for companies that if either one of our kits doesn't cover it, we do research specifically in their industry and build the same kit using the same framework, but the actual content and the behavior attributes within them, the trigger events, persona objectives, will be completely different. That said, we have adapted the kit itself in a variety of situations. So we've, for example, done a medication adherence workshop using the finance kit. Or we have, even though the finance kit is customer facing, we've done financial advisor personas using that. So it does mean one layer of extrapolation, because in there it's like, oh, this is how I buy a house. But instead of saying that, you say something else and have participants be cognizant of that while they're walking through the process. But to build a kit yourself, I don't know. I hope you hire us to do it if you want to do that.
Thanks.
Do you ever push back on people when they want you to map user personas back to the buyer personas? Or tell them
Map user personas back to?
to the buyer personas? Do you ever push back and say
To the marketing personas?
Yeah.
No, we do not stop them. In fact, this is a discussion we had only recently within the organization. The question was, what do we do when people are trying to map these personas, behavior-based personas, back to marketing personas? So you might be aware of typical marketing personas have like customer segments in it, right? Things like married 30-year-old living in Westport, Connecticut. Yeah. So something like that. But the challenge we've seen with pushing back on that, some of those personas are ridiculous. Seriously, like they have the gender of the person within it. So it's like, bland woman or something like that, and they expect us to map personas back to them. But we've realized that it's a battle that we lose because especially large organizations, they have changed their infrastructures around these personas. They have invested a lot into them, and they're socialized, and there a huge number of people are talking about them, about those specific personas. But what we do, and we haven't done this yet, but we've talked internally about doing this, is that when we are talking about behavior-based personas, we use this to supplement their existing demographic personas, because those personas might not have the information that we have here. Those are only assumptions of how people will behave. So we don't ask them to throw that out. We just ask them to use this to supplement that, if possible.
So how do you actually map them if they're so different?
So, for example, if you have the examples that I said, what did I say? 30-year-old married woman living in Westport, Connecticut, has 2 cars. Same woman, same profile, can behave in a variety of ways. So we will have them work through the activity of, again, let's use easily influenced, rarely influenced. So there's one who is easily influenced, one rarely influenced. Suppose she's from an affluent neighborhood and wants to invest money. Would she go to one financial advisor? Would she go to multiple financial advisors before making a decision on who she would work with? So we use this demographic detail to color that, behavioral detail to color the demographic personas that they might have. In theory, we haven't done it yet.
Did you actually combine them, or you have them separate?
Have them separate. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll go to that side next.
Do you have any tips or best practices on how to do persona validation after you go through this process, as well as how to best integrate it into a team's process and kind of development?
Yeah. The question is, how do we validate personas and how to integrate it into a team's process and development? Do you want to take that?
Or at least the first part.
So that's really when you set your business objective, that's why we recommend that you make your objective measurable, because if you have asked, or you are seeking to raise uptake of something 25%, and you design based on your personas, and you get a 5% lift, you maybe didn't hit the mark, right? And if you get it there, then you're like, oh yeah, okay, this was an effective way to do it. And what was the second part of?
How do you involve it in the process? How do you make sure teams use it?
So what I can't speak from within an organization, but once we do personas for people and hand them off, we are not in control. But I know at MadPow, since we have developed this methodology, we've met with our sales team and talked to them about when they are talking to clients, what words to listen for to know that this would be an effective tool when we're writing up SOWs, when we're just in a client meeting and we hear someone talk about how we're just not sure of XYZ. You just have to be a really good listener, and you start to hear opportunities to bring this up as a tool for them to use. But again, I don't know what they do once we release them.
That's interesting also, because she was talking about understanding their team dynamics before we talk about how they actually use it. So that helps us to know. As I mentioned earlier, there might be teams that are not very savvy in customer-centered thinking versus those that are very savvy, and we can actually help them both in different ways. So the non-savvy ones, it can be the conversation generator. Several clients have told us that even if they don't end up at personas that get used, just the act of getting into the room together and talking about this has been super valuable for them, versus those that are very savvy and they need new personas every time working on new projects. It's super helpful for them. But to your question of how do we ensure it gets into the actual process, so that's where the design tips really come in handy. Because typical personas, you don't have anything actionable on them. We classify them as two sort of categories, which is experience implications and design tips. So experience implication means that, and you write that in the context of whatever your product or service is. So if a persona is easily influenced, what does it mean for their experience with this product or service? Versus design tips is very actionable, right? Saying something like, since this persona is easily influenced, make sure that you have you provide them social proof when pushing them towards a decision or whatever. So that collection of actionable points, and that's why the majority of the space on this is really taken up by that space, because that is what makes it actionable for people to use. Very often, just us talking about their goals, their behavior, us as designers and researchers talking about their goals, behaviors, barriers might not be enough for solution building teams to translate. So that's where we brought that extra step in.
So thanks for sharing the information with us. So what are the biggest challenges I end up having with presenting new frameworks is just getting people to kind of understand and buy into it. So I was kind of curious if you, I don't know how many clients you've actually tried this methodology out with, but if you ever, how often do you encounter clients who are resistant to using this method, and then do you kind of just like leave it at that, or do you like try to still get their buy-in and you know what works?
So to proceed that, I'll start with the engagement models that we have. So people can either do two sorts of workshops with us with this kit. So if you're not using the free online version, you want the actual kit, we don't let them, sorry, am I running out of time?
No, you're so good. One more question after this.
Okay, cool. So we can do a workshop with them to train their teams to facilitate the activity within their organization. Option one. Option two is we work with them on actually analyzing the research that they have. So at a session such as this, which is again a one-day session, we teach them how to use the kit as well as how to translate their research into the actual behavior attributes. And at the end of the day, they end up with an actual persona that they can use. So again, it depends on the team. So the interest that we've had from clients on the question really was how, I'm paraphrasing. Yeah, are people receptive to it and how do they socialize it within their organizations? So usually people that have interest in the kit are people such as yourself who are from UX or research, customer experience, innovation, data analytics, etc., who have that role of bringing that customer-centered thinking in an organization. So we work with them, we empower them, we often talk to whoever they want us to talk to about the kit, tell them how it works and what value it can bring. And they often become evangelists for us within the organization. And if we do a workshop with them, they then become that person who drives the adoption of the kit. The kit's not been around long enough that we know that it's being used for a long period of time. That is something we'll have to see over some time to see how long that engagement lasts. Because I already picked you once, I'm gonna pick it.
So I know your kits are domain specific, sort of the ones that you presented at least. I guess one of the things I'm struggling with is, I know it's based on a lot of research that you guys have done in secondary research. They feel a little prescriptive on some level. It's the nature of sort of printing something out, it's sort of static. I'm curious if you've ever worked with these with a company that's brought some of their research to the table that sort of has thrown a wrench in the structure that is created. Either they have a piece of research that doesn't align with what you have, or sort of maybe would reprioritize sort of your steps or anything like that.
I personally haven't run into that, but you know, when we are working with clients, we often tell them that our research is a launch pad. Our persona objectives are a start, right? And even our design tips. If you are someone who has a lot of experience in a particular industry that that isn't necessarily covered here, you may have different insights, but the attributes here are fairly kind of, I'm going to say, like generic to human behavior. But again, one of the things we like to teach people is when you look at your research and there are attributes, like one of the things we think about a lot, and it's not necessarily a behavior, but it is something that affects behavior, is like health literacy. Like if there's something that comes up over and over again in your industry, I think that, I know that this is flexible and fluid enough to teach you what you need to know to create the attributes that will fit your specific scenario.
Just that we intend the framework to be flexible. So if people want to adapt to it, they're more than welcome to. We encourage that. We've had situations in which we've taken only parts of a kit and applied it to actual projects that we are running as MadPower as a consultancy. So we really try to use it in a variety of situations. Another example that I'll give you is that when a lot of people see this, they're like, I'm going to use this to train my staff. And then they take it back and they're like, okay, I have my case manager, or I have medical students that I'm teaching. I'm going to use this and I'm going to have them read and recognize different kind of personality traits that are likely to arise in situations. So it's intended to be flexible. We've not had a wrench in it yet, but that might happen as it gets used.
And you're right, it is prescriptive because that's sort of the point, like for people who might not be used to design thinking, to actually give them something that they can walk away with, where, even if they're inexperienced with UX, that they will say like, oh wow, like chunking content really makes a difference, or breaking things into steps instead of one paragraph makes a difference. Like to some people that might be obvious, and we're not saying always do that, but it really is, like something that if they use these things, they are more likely to have an effective product.
Before I let Joe take over, so that there is the link and the download code if you want to download it and try it out. Again, the light kit is industry agnostic, and if you use it, you'll realize that it has a lot less detail than the full kits. Please come check out the full kits after we finish. And let us know how it goes. Like that's what it looks like when it's printed out. I'll go back there in 1 second. It's really not as finished as this, but you can print it out, cut it, use it as you wish. That's the code right there.
Thank you guys both for this awesome presentation. Yeah, let's hear it for very cool.